Imagine seeing an innocent 8-year-old boy sitting in an adult jail cell. You are informed that he is in jail for murdering his parents. Do you think that this 8-year-old boy should be held in an adult jail cell compared to a juvenile cell? Before you answer the question in your mind, you have to remember that in fact he did murder 2 people, whether it was his parents or not. Now think back to when you were a child and you always made mistakes growing up, but that's part of growing up. I realized that I made a lot of bad judgment calls when I was growing up as well, and most of us tend to act on impulse and forget about the consequences later on. This is the exact situation of juveniles as well. So I think that juveniles should not be tried as adults. We need to realize that our children are our future and will better our society if these problems are fixed. So first I'll explain some background history of juveniles. Next I will explain how some children are born into the crime environment. And next I'll explain how some children need help and need to be given a second chance at life to show that they are better than the crime that they committed. So now I will explain some background history on juveniles. Juveniles arrests have been an issue in society, but have kind of been put on the back burner. Most people don't understand that juvenile crimes happen on an everyday rate, which is horrible, but it does happen. It is part of life. Juvenile delinquency is one of the most serious problems within a society, whether it's vocalized or not. According to the United States Department of Justice, there were a total of about 32 million 10 to 18-year-old adolescents in 2009. 1 million out of the 32 million children that were alive in 2009 committed a crime that were sent to juvenile hall. These statistics show that juvenile delinquency is a problem to society due to the high number of arrests and crimes being committed in a society. Before the establishment of juvenile courts, children under the age of 7 were never held responsible for a criminal act. The law considered them incapable of forming a criminal intent. They thought that they were so young that they could not do anything wrong, which, nowadays that's not really true. Children between the ages of 7 and 14 were thought incapable of committing a criminal act at all. So you have children all the way up to 14 that were considered not being able to make a criminal act or doing any wrong in society. According to the U.S. Department of Justice, the juvenile arrest rate for all offenses reached its highest level in the last 2 decades, which right here you can see is one of the most. In 1996 was the most crimes that were committed by juveniles. Police have tried to help these crime rates drop, and so has society, which has helped, but not by much. So we continue to grow and continue to talk about it so that these changes can be made. So I just talked about some history of juveniles. Now we'll explain how some children are kind of born into this crime environment. A negative environment has a negative influence on a child. For example, if you see your parent going in and out of jail for doing several different crimes, by nature, the child will follow. Being a young child, you tend to have an imitation trait or a copycat trait. So whatever you see in your environment, whether positive or negative, you're going to imitate it. As said by the New York Times, children are less mature, more vulnerable to peer pressure, cannot escape dangerous environments, and their characters are still in formation. If the child were confined to an adult cell, some negative effects may happen, such as sexual abuse or even suicide. Children should not be exposed to such behavior at such a young age because it prevents them from growing up due to the fact that they're still surrounded by that negative environment. So in the article about Greg Owsley in New York Times, Greg Owsley was a 14-year-old teen who killed his parents. So this is Greg, and this is his parents, which he killed later on. He got into a fight with his parents, which any normal teenager would, and his mom came into his room and asked him, why are you starting a fight? Like, what's going on? And his mother said that, Greg said to his mother that just always thought about murder and suicide. And his mother played it off like having too much imagination or watching too many movies. And in consequence to this mental illness, he was, 4 days later, he killed his parents with this shotgun. And most people couldn't fathom that even a teenage boy who planned and carried out a crime was not just a moral transgression, but almost a biological one. He was later put into the adult justice system, which had a lot of controversy because he was one of the youngest inmates in that prison. But the end result was that Greg stayed in the adult justice system, and this is him now. He was diagnosed with a mental illness that was never caught when he was a child. So that mental illness led him to killing his parents. So not only could this have been prevented if his mom actually listened, but it's part of his environment and part of his genetics, which he had no control over. So I just explained how some children are influenced by their home environment or by genetics. So finally, I will explain that these children need help and need to be given a second chance. Obviously, if they're in this predicament, they obviously need help in life. Children need constructive and professional help by therapists, psychiatrists, psychologists, anyone that could possibly help every day to fix their lives to make better choices. They need to be also in the education system because they need more knowledge once they get out of the system. If they have no education, they're not really going to go anywhere and they're going to go back to crime. So according to youth.gov, there are 2 key assets needed by all youth, which is learning and doing, and attaching and belonging. When the necessary supports and services are provided to assist youth, it is expected that positive outcomes will result. So obviously this could be adopted by the teachers or educators that are in a juvenile hall. But I believe that every juvenile has the opportunity to grow from their mistakes and to make their lives better than it was before they actually got into the crime. So I just talked about how these children need more help and resources to change their future. So in conclusion, juveniles should not be tried as adults. So first I explained some history and background of juveniles, and then I explained how some children are born into the crime environment, and last I explained that these children need help along their way of life. So I encourage you guys to educate those around you who think that juveniles are definitely making crimes, but they don't fully understand what they're doing and what the crimes are until much later on in life. You can become a pen pal with them and let them know that they have a friend to lean on, but it can also make you understand where they're coming from and how they grew up. And everyone has a rough time in their life, so no matter if it's a child or a juvenile or an adult, everyone should just be there along the way to help them in the way of life. Thank you.